Hi, this is Alex from devstories.eu, OpenAPI and Swagger Ecosystem, Episode 7 of 19. When you are sending hundreds of fields to an API, query parameters break down. You need a structured package. That package is defined by structuring input request bodies. While GET requests rely on the URL path and the query string, POST, PUT, and PATCH requests do the heavy lifting by carrying a payload. This payload holds complex, nested data. In older Swagger 2.0 specifications, you might recall defining body parameters or form parameters directly alongside header and path inputs. OpenAPI version 3 fundamentally changed this. It dropped body parameters entirely and introduced a single dedicated request body object. The request body object sits at the operation level of your API design. Its defining feature is that it relies heavily on content negotiation. You do not just describe the data, you map the data to specific media types. This mapping happens inside the content map. The content map is a dictionary where the keys are standard MIME types like application/JSON, and the values are media type objects detailing what that specific payload looks like. Consider a client uploading a new user profile. The profile contains a name, an email address, user preferences, and a nested address object. Instead of jamming this into URL variables, the client sends a JSON payload. In your OpenAPI document, under the request body, you create a content map with the exact key application/JSON. This explicitly declares that the API only accepts JSON for this operation. If a client tries to send XML or plain text, the server knows immediately to reject the request with an unsupported media type error. This structure is highly flexible. If your user profile upload requires a profile picture alongside the textual data, you handle it in the exact same place. You add a second key to the content map for multipart/form data. This media type object then specifies the rules for the mixed payload. Each media type gets its own independent definition. This allows the exact same API endpoint to process fundamentally different data formats based entirely on the content type header the client sends in the HTTP request. Inside the request body object itself, alongside the content map, you'll find a required flag. This is a simple Boolean property. Setting it to true means the request will fail immediately if the client sends an empty body. It enforces the presence of the payload before the server even attempts to validate the data inside. The actual structural rules of the payload itself are handled by a schema attached to the media type object, though the deep mechanics of JSON schema design will be covered in Episode 10. Here is the key insight. The request body object decouples the raw data payload from the HTTP transport parameters, allowing a single endpoint to enforce entirely different validation rules based solely on the media type declared in the content map. That's all for this one. Thanks for listening, and keep building.